Hello, Patrick.
Hello, Agatha. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. I can barely hear you.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now, yes. Can you hear me well?
Oh, that's good. Yeah. We're just waiting for more people to join in. Then we'll be.
No
Yes,
worries.
you're loud and clear.
Yes, I just wanted to be sure that I can also present as we wait for people. Could we
Project?
test the system? Yes,
Yes.
project.
Yes, just try projecting, please.
You can see the presentation? Hello?
Yes, we can see it.
Yes, we
Perfect.
can. Yes, we can.
Okay. Okay,
We can,
perfect.
madam.
Thank you, thank
Can
you.
you hear us?
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you, madam. Thank you. Good morning to you.
Good morning, good morning. Patrick, is it okay if I leave that screen there? Or you want to put back the one you had? Patrick? Okay, EABC Secretariat?
Yes. Yeah, we are going to project the first presentation on the ground rules.
Okay, no
So yeah,
problem.
we
Let
can
me
just share it.
then let me stop sharing. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, very good morning to you all. I welcome you all to the webinar on the second edition of the Barometer on Trading Services in the East Africa community. I request to give others 5 minutes to join so that we may start our webinar. But as we wait, please feel free to fill on the chat your name, organization, and your email address so that we'll be able to share the presentation and everything after this meeting. Thank you. Karibuni sana.
Asante.
Good morning once again. Karibuni sana. My name is Hidaya Mkwizu. I'm the Trade Policy and Legal Affairs Officer at the East Africa Business Council. I would like to appreciate the presence of our board director, Mr. Rabogo, who is on call. Also, I would like to appreciate the presence of Dr. Shiford from Nairobi. Also, I've seen Mariam and Michael. And also, I would like to appreciate the presence of Dr. Maleko from Smite Services Tanzania. Please feel free to fill on the chat your contact details if you did not register before, so that we'll be able to share the reports and the presentations after this meeting. As we wait for our executive director to join, I would like to welcome you all and just to give you the brief of our webinar today. We will have a very exciting agenda whereby we'll first have the welcoming remarks from Mr. Adrian Jau, who is the Acting Executive Director of the East Africa Business Council. And also we'll have the remarks from the EAC JZ. After that, we'll also have the remarks from the EAC. Then this will be followed by the presentation of the EABC Barometer on Trading Services in the East Africa community. After this, we will have the open discussion, whereby we request it to be the interactive session. We request all the participants to participate in this discussion after the presentation from Ms. Agatha. Then after that, we will have the closing remarks by our Acting Executive Director, Mr. Adrian Jau. I would also give you the ground rules of our webinar. Number one, where we request to mute your microphone and video when you are not speaking. Also, we request you to contribute to the meeting goals. And we also request you to stay on point and on time. We also request you to focus on the topic. The questions can be sent to the chat room. Also, the meeting will be recorded for reporting purposes, and a report of the meeting will be shared accordingly. Thank you very much. I'll just give you a brief introduction of the webinar today. The East Africa Business Council, with the support from GIZ, has developed the second edition of the Barometer on Trading Services in the East Africa community. This edition builds upon the findings of the first edition that was conducted in 2022. This edition focused on the sectors such as financial services, tourism services, communication services, transport services, as well as professional services. Now coming to this second edition of the Barometer of Trading Services, we also expand into the following subsectors, which include the business services, communication, distribution, air transport services, as well as road transport services. Additionally, this second edition incorporates the assessments from the EAC liberalization commitments under the AFCFTA. This barometer will evaluate overall trends in the service performance in terms of GDP, employment, as well as the export in trade. We expect the outcome of this webinar to be increased awareness of the state of market openness and trade restrictions in the services within the EAC. So thank you very much again. I have seen Mr. Adrian Jau has already joined, the Acting Executive Director of the East Africa Business Council. So without further ado, I would like to welcome Mr. Adrian Jau for his opening remarks. Karibu sana, Mr. Njau.
Okay, thank you very much, moderator, for delaying me in joining. I had some hitches, but I think now I'm okay. I thanks all for actually attending this validation workshop. And without much ado, let's start my open remarks. I acknowledge the presence of the EAC Secretariat official, Ms. Estela Riada, Component Lead, Trading Service, supporting to EAC Integration Project, SEMPAC and GIZ, all regulators and policymakers on trading services across the EAC partner state, EABC members and the EAC service providers, members of the media, all protocol observed. But also I'm told some of my members are here, board members. I would like to thank them for joining us. Good morning. Allow me to thank all for finding time amidst your busy schedule to participate in this virtual launch of the second Barometer on Trading Services in East Africa. Distinguished participant, EABC with support of GIZ, support East Africa, the EAC integration process, SEMPAC, and a project to enhance EAC private sector participation in EAC and continental integration process, undertook second edition of the Barometer Trading Services in East Africa community. The overall objective of the Barometer is to support improvement in the framework condition for growth of services in the East Africa community. As part of this, as part of EABC advocacy agenda, the East Africa Business Council developed and launched the first Barometer on Trading Services in East Africa community in September 2022. As such, this second edition of the Barometer builds on the first Barometer using largely the same methodology, but expanding the sector of the focus and also including the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, the assessment where the EAC partner state actually made commitment for the 5 priority sectors. First, we are very grateful to GIZ for financially supporting the development of this barometer. Distinguished participant, the second barometer has focused on the following sector and subsectors. Business services, most of them is a professional services. Communication, where the focus is telecommunication and the other information technology aspect. Distribution, we are talking of retail and wholesale. Air transport services, which more focus on passenger and freight. Road transport, where we focus on the freight transport and services, and financial services. Today, as we validate the draft of second edition of the Barometer on Trading Services in EAC, we are challenging you to critically look on the following issues. Overall trend on service performance and contribution to gross domestic product, employment, and export of trade. State of openness of the, with consideration to to the revised schedule of progressive liberalization of trade in services vis-a-vis commitment in the Common Market Protocol, as well as the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, especially the 5 priority sectors. Another area which we need also to look is the restrictiveness of the service trade environment and the advancement and the progress of the regional level on the EAC trade in services agenda. Another area is the implication of the EAC partner state commitment of the 5 priority service sector and the Africa Continental Free Trade Area Trade in Services Protocol. Distinguished participant, without unfolding the finding of the barometer, I would like to underscore that since the launch of the first edition of Barometer in 2022, EABC and the private sector in general has witnessed mixed trend on the progress in the area of trade in services. Some of the positive trends which I would like to highlight include the development and adoption of the EAC strategy for trade in services, along with an implementation plan for the strategy. We thank the EAC partner state for this bold move, but also we thank GIZ for supporting this. Also, we have seen United Republic of Tanzania and the Republic of Burundi join one network areas. And we are expecting the expansion of this one network area will progressively lowering the cost of cross-border communication, especially telecommunication. Another positive trend is development of an EAC e-commerce strategy and establishment of the EAC commerce engagement, e-commerce engagement platform. This is very critical for the private sector as business actually move to digital technology. Also, we have seen directive from the EAC policy organ for partner state to commence negotiation of the 5 service sector which are not covered under the common market when it's come to the schedule of liberalization of trade in services. But also, from the private sector view, we have actually also seen negative trend, and which is very critical for private sector is the non-implementation of the revised schedule of commitment for progressive liberalization of trade in services, which was adopted in 2019 by Sectoral Council of Trade, Industry, Finance, and Investment. This inaction has been denied private sector advantage presented by further liberalization of the agreed service sector, as well as commitment which facilitate free movement of service suppliers. As you all understand, and the schedule, which is actually in place now, which was agreed in 2010, we had challenges where actually we were linking movement of service provider or service supplier with movement of workers. So this has limited the free movement of service suppliers of different categories like intra-corporate transfers, business visitors, contractual service supplier, independent professional, and in some country, the trainees, because the revised one has the link and this has not been adopted. And even sometimes, actually, when we were doing this one, I was wondering, should we, when we are doing, we are looking performance, should we look this revised schedule, which has not been adopted, which has not come to the operation? That is a challenge from the private sectors. I understand some country practically may be implementing them, but for private sector, which they need predictability, they will like this thing to be finalized and start implementing. It is my hope as we validate this barometer, we will come up with, we'll look this issue differently as previous recommendation have not yielded as the intended result. So we are expecting to come up with a practical recommendation which will actually support further liberalization and further performance of trade service in our economics. With these few remarks, I thank you all and wish you fruitful deliberations. Welcome and thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Adrian Joy, for your insightful remarks. And I just quoted you that this, you may ask yourself why this second edition of the barometer, but the first edition had only 5 sectors, but now we have expanded to 8 sectors. But the more exciting thing is that this second edition, it also incorporates the assessment of the EAC liberalization commitments under the AFCFTA. And I heard also you said that we have witnessed mixed trends in the services, including the URT and Burundi. They have already joined the one network area that is lowering the cost of the telecommunication. But also, I also had the issue of the EAC e-commerce strategy, and also the 5 sectors which were not covered on the common market, but they are the key sectors under this AFCFTA. So I heard that you also said you expect this second edition will come up with the practical recommendations that will help further liberalization. So I really appreciate your insightful remarks. And I also would like to take this opportunity to now welcome the Miss Estela Ariada from the EAC GIZ, our partner, for the remarks. Karibu sana, Miss Ariada.
Thank you. Thank you, Hilda. I hope you can hear me. And thank you, Adrian, for inviting us to this validation webinar. I'm Estela Ariada. I'm the component lead for trading services here at the GIZ EAC program in Arusha called SEMPIC. So I want to start by first congratulating you, EABC, on engaging the private sector to get their feedback and input into this second trading services barometer. I see its importance in at least 3 main areas. So first, with a new addition that Adrian has mentioned, it will help us to track how far the region has gone in realizing the objectives of the Common Market Protocol, especially as it relates to free movement of persons, of services. Having a 2-year window between the first and second barometer also helps us to see how fast we are moving and what are some of the humps and potholes that we are finding along the way. So it helps us to measure distance and also in a way to measure speed. And thirdly, for us as GIZ and for other stakeholders, it also gives us a glimpse into the impact of some of the interventions that we're supporting. So over the last 2 years, we have been working with the EAC in a wide range of areas on this topic. Our intervention has been mainly in improving the business environment for trading services in the region. And here we have, for example, supported the development of the trading services strategy and the implementation plan. We have supported training and capacity building for negotiators. And more recently, we have been working with officials and key stakeholders in the Republic of South Sudan to help them to develop a schedule of commitments. In fact, the draft is ready and should be presented to the EAC organs before the end of this year. So for us now, the barometer can help us potentially to give an indication on what the results of these interventions have been. We also work in specific sectors. So for instance, we're working in tourism, and we supported the harmonization of classification criteria for tourism establishments. In the ICT sector, we've supported the framework for the One Network area and the e-commerce strategy. We're also working in professional services, and mainly our intervention there is through our sister project called Digit, which is supporting the operationalization of mutual recognition agreements in general and facilitating the implementation of the MRA for engineers. We are also currently in the early stages of supporting further liberalization in trade and services and CSO engagements in regional integration through our Team Europe initiative called Lifted. So it will build on the current initiatives that we have in supporting overall policy, legal, and regulatory reforms to support trade and services. But we also have support earmarked there for tourism and also MRAs. Importantly, through Lifted, we intend to partner with EABC to take the lead in implementing private sector facing activities. So some of these include, for example, generating trading services, policy advocacy agenda, and organizing a platform where trading services issues can be discussed with stakeholders in the region and also with key counterparts in the EAC. There will also be activities related to training, capacity building, and specific market development initiatives. So these are some of the initiatives that we are supporting the EAC now. And we see the barometer as a key tool to help us answer the so what question. So we have a trading services strategy. So what? We have an e-commerce strategy. What has this changed in the e-commerce space? And so on and so forth. And we look to the private sector to be giving us this feel and these answers, not only on what is working well, but also in some of the areas where perhaps the reforms are not leading to the impacts that had been anticipated. So thank you once again for inviting us to this validation workshop. I look forward to the discussion as you validate the barometer. Some of our colleagues who've been working directly on tourism and on the One Network area, as well as on MRAs, may also be participating in the discussion. So with those viewers, I want to thank you once again and to wish you successful discussions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Stella, for the insightful remarks from EAC GIZ. And I just quote the last sentence that you said, that this barometer is going to help us to answer the so what question. So I believe this is going to be also an interactive session. And I also would like to congratulate you for the work that you are doing on the tourism and ITC on the one network area, and also the MRAs. And GIZ is really doing the great work in the intervention of the EAC economic integration. So we really appreciate your work that you are doing. And before I welcome the Miss Agatha, I would also would like to request those who did not register to put on the chat your name, organization on the email, so that we'll be able to share the report and the presentation after this webinar. And now I would like now it's the time that you listen carefully for the presentation of the EABC Barometer on Trading Services in the EAC. So I now welcome Miss Agatha Nderitu for the presentation. Thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you clearly.
Can you see my screen?
Yes, madam, we can see it. Karibu.
Okay. You can still see my screen? Sorry, what am I doing? You can see my screen?
Yes, we can see it clearly.
Okay. Thank you very much. And I take this opportunity, first of all, to recognize the Acting Executive Director, EABC, as well as the other EABC directors. And I also recognize Estella from GIZ and the other GIZ colleagues. And of course, all the delegates and participants who have joined us. I observe all protocols. So allow me now to go straight to the presentation. A lot has been said in terms of the objectives, but I will very quickly give an overview, and I will also introduce the methodology that we used. Then I'm going to look at the barometer and what it is telling us. I recognize that I had little time to present, so there are some things that perhaps if you ask questions, I will point you to the report and we can discuss them further. But then after discussing some of those sector analysis, the barometer findings, which also include the sector analysis, we will also look at some of the recommendations that we are making. So allow me, and I think this has already been raised in terms of the objectives of the barometer and what we are hoping that the barometer can contribute to, which is to show where are the pain points, for want of a better term, where are the pain points for the private sector, but also what is some of the progress that we have seen, and based on that progress, how do we then how do we feel? Because the barometer is like a feel. How do we feel the trading services agenda is going on at the EAC level? And maybe just to give a quick background, as you know, within the EAC, we have liberalized 7 priority sectors, and these are business, services, communication, distribution, education, financial, tourism, and transport services. And within these, countries were at liberty to make the commitments, or to liberalize the sectors or subsectors, to liberalize the subsectors within this, that they wanted to attract, say, investment in their country, or they wanted to attract skills, whether it is through Mode 4, or wanted to attract the services themselves, whether it's through, say, cross-border supply. Now, if you look at the Common Market Protocol and the schedule of commitments, we were expected as partner states to have fully implemented all our commitments by the 31st of December 2015. So we did have a transition period from 2010 to 2015. But what the barometer is showing us is that we were not able to meet that commitment in terms of creating that common market for services. You will note, of course, even as we go on, that a lot of progress has been made, and even when you look at the trade statistics, you will note the trade statistics are increasing, but there are quite a number of challenges that are limiting our ability to fully leverage a common market for services in the EACs. And I think that's what we are really looking to speak to. So in terms of the sectors, yes, I think the sectors have been elaborated. I think the only other thing I could add is that in this edition, we are also looking at education services, and we are also looking at distribution services. Those are two services I didn't hear mentioned. And in professional services, we try to look at as many of the professional services. There are usually 11. And when I say usually 11, this is based on the categorization of the WTO, which, as you know, gives us the broader framework within which we understand services. So we did expand, and I should say part of this expansion was also in response to a request by partner states that we should, rather than just look at some sectors, we should look at all the sectors. And now it wasn't possible, and EABC may feel free here to weigh in. It wasn't possible given the available resources to do an overall analysis of all the 7 sectors, because within those 7 sectors, you have about 144 subsectors. And within those subsectors, you then have very many subsectors. So what we agreed with the EABC, and this is important to note, is that in every edition of the barometer, EABC will continue to increase the number of sectors that it is looking at. But in this one, they've already added to the sector. So this time, at least all the 7 sectors are being analyzed. But within that, then there are some aspects that we have gone deeper, like in business services, we have gone deeper in professional services and left some of the other business services. But again, it is this is something that EABC intends that towards in the future, they can look at all the 7 subsectors, and even since we are talking about negotiation of the new sectors, all the 160 subsectors that fall under the broader service sector categorization. Sorry. So in terms of the methodology, what we did again is we tried to align it to the same methodology we used the last time. So we looked at 4 broad parameters, the first one being performance of trade in services. And in terms of performance, we were looking at contribution of services to GDP, and then contribution of services trade. So here we have to differentiate services. So when we say broadly say how much is construction contributing, how much is business services contributing as economic activities, but there is the trade aspect of it, which now it is trading between EAC and the world. And I say and the world because as yet we don't have statistics to show intra-EAC trade in services, although there is a lot of work that is going on in that area. Then we are also looking at contribution of services to employment. And then we are looking at EAC services, exports and imports based on ITC data. In terms of the period of focus, we looked at 2018 to 20, in fact, this should read to 2018/2019, and then 2023 to 2022, 2022 to 2023, not 2023 to 2023. That's a typo, I will correct it. What we found, particularly in terms of data, is that very many countries don't yet have updated data. So you will note once you see the report, for those of you who have seen it, is that in some sectors we have even data going back to 20 2021. I think for one sector, we even have only up to 2022, because very many countries have not updated their service sector statistics. Again, part of the challenge is that this is one of the main areas where we have a challenge as East Africa, that we haven't been collecting trading services data, but it is also a challenge that is being addressed, as you will see in the areas I note progress. Then the other thing we were looking at, is the restrictiveness of the services trading environment. And here, I see I skipped one. Okay, so one is the restrictiveness of the services trade environment. And here what we have used is the regulatory audits that were undertaken by the WTO and the World Bank, as well as the services trade restrictiveness index. The whole idea here, again, because of the limitations that were there in terms of the resource envelope for this work, we couldn't go to the regions to meet with stakeholders one-on-one to understand what are some of the challenges, what are some of the regulatory environment, regulatory changes that have taken place. So we utilized this regulatory audits. I should add here actually that they were also partly supported by the GIZ. So not just the WTO, but they all worked towards the broader WTO Services Trade Restrictiveness Index. So we have used those surveys. I do recognize already as one of the limitations that a number of these surveys were deemed not to have been validated because they were undertaken in 2021, 2022. I think 2020, 2021, 2022, I think for the most recent were 2022. And I know that there are plans underway to validate them. I believe there is a council or a STIFI directive to that end. So if you do see, when you see the report, if you do see something within the regulatory environment that you feel this is not correct or this has been since removed, just bear in mind that this will also be corrected once these validations are done. The other thing we looked at is the state of openness, and I think Adrian has spoken a lot about this. So we were looking to see, and for those of you who attended the first one, we did look a bit at to what extent have partner states improved on their offer. I think the broader guideline here is that initially, because we used what is called a positive list approach, there was the conclusion by member states, by partner states, let me call them the right term, by partner states that we had not created, we had not committed to liberalize a substantial enough number of subsectors to create a good common market for services. As I said, out of the 7 sectors, we have about 144 subsectors, out of which we had only liberalized 57%. So the STIFI gave a directive that all partner states had to increase their commitment to at least 78 subsectors. The caveat, of course, is that already we had some countries that had met and surpassed that threshold. So when we say that the improvement is in some countries, bear in mind that perhaps those countries had much further to go than the others. The other thing we have looked at here is the AFCFTA and what countries have committed under the AFCFTA. Of course, the broader guideline here is that the first phase of liberalization under AFCFTA was looking at 5 sectors. So we are only looking within those 5 sectors. And then the other guideline, of course, is that because EAC, we are a deeper integration, we are a common market, while AFCFTA is a free trade area. We don't expect that we would have made more commitments at AFCFTA than at EAC. So even as I show that we made fewer commitments. That is not a bad thing because we have to show substantial liberalization within the EAC if we are operating a common market. So that's also another thing that we want to bear in mind. Sorry, the other, which direction am I going? The other thing that we have done is, sorry. The other thing that we have done is looked at what is some of the progress in terms of taking forward the services agenda at a regional level. And here again, we will talk about some of the issues, and I think Adrian raised a number of them. And what we were looking, if we see any clawback, like say there has been there has been new developments that have taken away some of the liberalization commitments, we would then deem the overall barometer or within that particular indicator as being negative. So allow me now to go directly to the, sorry, I don't know why this thing is misbehaving. Allow me now to go to the findings. And in terms of the findings, overall, and I say overall is when we look at the picture of what all the indicators are telling us, we still maintain that we are moving towards a positive direction. So we have given it a positive trend because we see that there is a lot that has happened. However, we underscore the need to address the existing restrictions and also to expedite the completion of ongoing regional initiatives. And again, I will hammer on expediting. I think we need to inject a sense of urgency into some of these activities. I was talking to some people I have been working with in the area of services, and somebody who had gone away, and when they came back and I told them where we are at, they were very shocked that we are still talking about, say, the revised schedule of commitments, that it is not yet, it has not yet been annexed to the common market protocol. And they were also shocked that there is a lot of the issues that we started discussing as way back as 2011, once the common market came into play, that we are still talking about today. So when I say that there is need to expedite, perhaps the team here could even propose more stronger terms to convey the message that the time is now, and there is a lot of urgency that needs to be injected into the processes that will continue to create a common market for services. So let us now look at the indicators. So that was the broader overall barometer, but what is guiding it? So if we look at the specific ones, so we can look at, the first thing we look at, sorry, I'm trying to remove here. So if we look at services performance, and here you might recall we are looking at things like GDP, contribution to employment, etc. So here we see a largely positive trend, and perhaps I should even maybe put it a very positive trend, because services contribution, whether it is to export, whether it's to GDP, whether it is to employment, has continued to rise. Albeit in some countries. So if we look at, say, for example, GDP, we see services is a leading contributor to GDP in most of the, actually in all the partner states. It accounts for more than half of Kenya's GDP at 55.5% based on 2023 data, and over 40% in other EAC partner states except Tanzania. So in Tanzania, based on 2023 data, it accounts for 28.9%, and this is a decline from 36.8%. But it is important to recall that contribution to GDP can move depending on how diversified an economy is becoming. So part of what we have also gone is a step ahead to just see, is the services value add growing, even though the overall contribution to GDP may be declining, say in Tanzania, has services itself as a sector, has that grown? And the picture is very positive. So if you look at, okay, this again, sorry. Okay. So this is just, sorry, this particular bit here in terms of contribution to GDP, this is the figure just to show you how it's been contributing. I think one of the key takeaways from here, besides the fact that it is a significant contributor, you can see here for Burundi, it's at 48%, for Rwanda, it's at 44%, for Uganda, it's at 42.4%. So it's a huge contributor. Maybe the thing to note is that in terms of the overall growth, it hasn't been very much. Overall, it has continued to be around the same figures. So if you look at, say, whether it's Burundi, it's from 47.8, 45, 44, 48. So again, even for Kenya, 56 to about 55.5. So it's been constant, not growing and not significantly reducing, except in Tanzania. And again, remember my caveat that it may reduce because of what else is contributing to GDP. And the next figure actually gives us that picture better. So if we look at the services value add to GDP, we see that services value add annual percentage growth is actually going up for all countries. I would like you to look at 2019 and where we were at. So services value add grew by 8.3% in Rwanda, which was the highest. Kenya at 6.5%, but I would like you also to see even for Tanzania, where we are saying overall contribution to GDP may be falling, but the overall value added by services is actually on the rise from 4.2 to current 2023 7.3. So again, it shows you that the economy may be becoming much more diversified. So more services are contributing, and you also have to bear in mind a country like Tanzania has quite a number of minerals that contribute significantly to GDP. I think the other thing I would like you to pick from this slide is just how much growth there has been since COVID. I know we have complained, or businesses have complained about the impacts of COVID, and that to some extent they are still yet to fully recover from those. But we can see just how much, this is 2020, how much we have grown since then. And you can see even growth has now surpassed 2019 figures, which I think gives a very, very significant story going forward, and which sort of explains why we give it a positive rating. If we look at contribution to employment, again here, one of the key messages to take away is that, of course, in all countries, except in Kenya, agriculture still remains a significant contributor to employment. And you can see in some countries like Burundi, the contribution is put at 85.1%. In Uganda, 66.3, Tanzania, 65.5. But what you will find, and this is an annex that I have put in the report, is that year on year, the contribution of services has been increasing, and it is currently highest in Kenya at about 55.1%, followed by Rwanda at 29.6%. Now, this contribution, these figures is very much aligned to what you will find when you look at the figures for other developing countries. So we are not doing badly. This is what you find for other developing countries. And also perhaps what this picture may not tell you is that we are using, this picture has used the ILO estimate 2022, and ILO for its estimates uses formal employment, which tells you that there is in terms of services contribution, it is likely to be much larger, because when you look at some service sectors, and I give you an example of, say, distribution services, where you have even your open air markets, your retail services, the guy operating a kiosk, all those are services sectors, or the guy operating a garage, those are service sectors which may not necessarily be captured in the formal employment, and we have a huge informal sector again which will not be captured here. So overall, I expect the contribution is much larger, but the data currently available is giving us this figure. Then if we look at performance, this is the services, trade in services contribution to GDP. Again, this is very much in trend with what you find in other developing countries, is that the services, trade in services contribution to GDP is not proportionate to the services contribution to GDP, which tells you that there is a huge room to improve our services trade. So except for South Sudan, which has a huge figure of about 63% of GDP is services related to, is contributed by trade in services. And again, I think we can recognize that in South Sudan, we may not have up-to-date data, because again, it's a country that is growing and a lot of data is not collected. I should say this data is based on the World Development Indicators. So we see South Sudan at 63%. For the rest of the countries, we are around 15% or less, with Rwanda being the highest at 13.2, followed by Burundi 12.5, and then Uganda at 11.5. I think, again, the key message from this slide is that there is the room for improvement in terms of trade in services as it contributes to GDP is there. And you can just look at, say, our trade, our merchandise trade contribution to GDP, which is usually quite high, just to have an idea of potential, where there is potential to grow. If we look at the actual service sector imports and exports, so we've tried to use the year for which we have data for most of the countries, which is 2022. I carry the caveat that even for that 2022, there are some countries that haven't reported, but majority, when I say majority, about 4 or 5 out of the 6 that we used, perhaps that is the other caveat I needed to carry, that even though we know DRC and Somalia have joined the EAC, because they haven't yet started implementing the EAC protocols, particularly the Common Market Protocol, we did not include them in this assessment. One might ask me, how come we included South Sudan? Because South Sudan has started implementing a number of the commitments, and even though their schedule is not yet formalized, they do have a schedule, and we have been trading in services with them since they became members, actually even before they became members. So data for South Sudan is there, and we have been trading with them for quite some time. So this data is for 6 partner states. When you throw in DRC particularly, and South Sudan, and Somalia, the data changes. It is a much bigger market, and I'll talk about that when I'm talking about some of the positives. But suffice it to say, the picture that we are getting is that we have been growing, and you can, even if we ignored the COVID impacts, we are still much higher. We are still doing, based on 2022 data, we are still doing much higher than we were doing in 2019. You can see in 2019, we had about 14.9 billion in terms of exports, and they have now grown to about 17.1 billion against 12.3 billion. So as a region, we are net I should say, as a region focused on the 6 countries, we are net exporters of services. That may change once we start putting data for DRC and DRC and Somalia, but again, the value of both exports and imports will go exponentially higher. But the picture or the message I want you to pick from here is that trade in services, our services, exports and imports have increased significantly, and you can see the recovery from COVID. I haven't put here what is guiding the trade, but in the report, you will get quite a lot of data at the sector level, and you will see that sectors like telecommunications are a big driver, but also interestingly, sectors like, well, perhaps not interesting, as is to be expected, is sectors like transport. I say as is to be expected because both air transport as well as road transport have been growing, and we have 2 ports. And perhaps when we now add Somalia, we will have 3 ports. So we have these are some of the sectors that are driving services exports. So allow me now to go to, so that was just looking at performance of services vis-a-vis services and trading services vis-a-vis GDP, employment, as well as trade. And we now go to assessing the state of openness. So this one, again, we had looked a bit at it, but allow me just to say that if you recall, we said that partner states had made very few commitments, about 57% of potential commitments. When you look at the revised schedule, this has increased now to about 69% of potential schedule. It would have been nicer if it was a solid 70%, but I digress. But what you see is that actually partner states have increased the number of subsectors. And here we have 92 new subsectors that have been added, a whole 92 subsectors. So what we haven't done in this analysis, and which I believe is something that EABC or even EAC might be interested in doing in the future, is just to see of those commitments, how many of them are full commitments and how many of them are partial commitments. And here, what do I mean? I can say that I have liberalized financial services, but within Mode 1, I have put a limitation that you can only do cross-border supply if you have an intermediary in my country. Or I say I have liberalized Mode 3, and you can only come into my country if that mode, if it is in joint venture with someone, and you are maybe taking 40% etc. So that is when it is a full commitment. There are no limitations at all that are maintained. So again, I think it is an additional assessment that can be carried out in the future. It is I want to imagine it's a complicated process because you go bit by bit on each and every mode of supply. And as you know, we have 4 modes of supply, and you have to look at them from the limitations on market access and limitations on national treatment. Nevertheless, the picture that we are getting is that there has been a significant increase in the number of subsectors that partner states are willing to commit. And perhaps more interesting is that these are in new sectors like business services or transport services and financial services, which are critical sectors. For any economy or any growth. These are sectors that are important and critical. So again, that's a positive thing. We also see that there are 9 subsectors that had previously no commitments that were added. I think the only thing to note here is that there was a decrease by the commitments by Rwanda by 2. And what they did is that they removed the commitments they had made on air transport, on the understanding that air transport is also mainly liberalized through the bilateral air service agreements. For me, this is a clawback. I don't know what EAC's view is, but since all countries had made commitment, well, not all of them, but countries had made some commitments in that area, I think the overall agreement was that no country would claw back. So again, perhaps this is a message to Rwanda to put back the commitments, particularly because as a region, we are also trying to liberalize the EAC airspace, so and to domesticate the EAC airspace. So that removal for me is a clawback, but maybe the EAC may have a different view. What else can I tell you about this one? So in the report, okay, perhaps also what is now useful to note is that all partner states, if you look at the commitments that are made by all partner states, because when we say a positive list approach, it means every partner state selects the countries that it wants to liberalize. And then you look to see which are the subsectors that all partner states have liberalized. So we now have 30 subsectors that have been liberalized by all partner states, which is up from 16. And we also have an additional 9 subsectors. I think I already said that have been liberalized that have now been liberalized under the revised schedule. Also important is that when you look at again, you look at maybe 4 of the partner states, we see 45% or 45 subsectors have been liberalized by 4 partner states. Here, we are using only the 5 countries because even though South Sudan has already developed a draft schedule, I believe they have not officially submitted it to the EAC. Otherwise, we would have done that analysis. And I think once they do the submission, we will have a newer picture in terms of how much bigger the common market could be in terms of what all the other or all the 6 countries will have liberalized, and the same when DRC and Somalia make their commitments. When we look at the AFCFTA, here what we find again, as I said, remember that in the AFCFTA it is okay. Oh, are you seeing my presentation?
No, we cannot see it.
Not at all. No.
Okay, hold on. I'm trying to remove, there is this small box that keeps coming. I tried to remove it and I removed the presentation in error. Hold on.
It's okay, take your time.
I want to how do I do this again? Hold on. Can you see it now?
Yes, now
Yes,
it's
thank you.
Okay, thank you, and my apologies. So we were looking at the state of openness for AFCFTA. When you look at the AFCFTA, what you find, and I was making the caveat that the expectation is that we will have more commitments at the EAC. So even as we compare with the EAC, bear that in mind, that I'm not very sure that comparison has a lot of weight. But again, Adrian, I think we had some interesting discussions about what to do with that comparison. And we can discuss that when we open up the discussions. But what we see is that all partner states, of course, have made commitments in the 5 priority sectors for AFCFTA. Rwanda has made the most commitments at 68, followed by Kenya, Burundi, Uganda, and then Tanzania. One of the things perhaps to bear in mind is that partner states made commitments based on based on additionality on what they have already opened up to the world. and we open up to the world through the General Agreement on Trade in Services, so GATT. So our commitments at AFCFTA are expected to be GATT plus. So in addition to what you opened up to the world, what is the preferential commitments you are making only for AFCFTA countries? So a lot of, and I know, let me speak for Kenya, where I am based, is that Kenya had quite a number of commitments already at GATT. So the additionality, or you may see 55, the additionality from a GATT perspective may be not as huge. So again, and perhaps in the future, this is also another analysis we can make in terms of how much more have you opened for AFCFTA and not only for GATT. And I think I've done that analysis somewhere. So perhaps it's something that I can also add to the I can add to the barometer. It's not part of what is already in the barometer, but I believe I have that analysis somewhere, and I'm happy to add it just for the future. And this analysis, again, did not consider whether the commitment is partial or full. I know the AFCFTA Secretariat has done that analysis, and it could also be something that we could, in the future or now, even look at and add to the overall assessment. But how does this number of commitments compare to other to the EAC? So here, this table is looking to show you. So overall, we have made about 157 less commitments under the AFCFTA, but I've already carried the caveat: less doesn't necessarily mean wrong. And the expectation is that we will have more commitments. So we have 157 more commitments within the EAC, where we have, and within the EAC means that for those commitments, we are offering better terms to ourselves as EAC, and by extension, we are protecting ourselves from competition from other African partner states. But you can see the difference is here in terms of what countries have offered. The difference is I think the highest difference is in Tanzania, which has liberalized about 73 subsectors within the EAC, against 15 within AFCFTA, which gives about 58. Now, perhaps what is also more useful or more interesting to note is that we as a region have made additional commitments, have made some commitments at the AFCFTA level that are not in our schedules of commitments. And here we have made 15 commitments at the subsector level and 31 at the subsector level. I don't think I put that there. So allow me just to show you. I want to show you something. Are you still seeing my screen? Are you still seeing my?
You.
Yeah?
We cannot see your screen.
No worries. Hold on. I want to show you something. Can you see my screen now?
Yes, now we can see it.
Okay, so these are tables of what, as EAC, we have only made the commitments we have only made at the AFCFTA level. So you can see, like for Burundi, in business services, rental and leasing services without operator, and those relating to ship, you have liberalized. Under telecommunication, you have liberalized circuit switched data transmission services, which is critical, and also privately circuit services. But you have also liberalized fax mail and electronic mail, which, because of technology, is now obsolete. So you have also liberalized, which I thought was very interesting, cargo handling services, storage and warehousing services, and freight transport agency services, which you haven't liberalized at the EAC level. Yet these are critical sectors. And perhaps, again, Adrian, we had this discussion. What is our message? Are we asking EAC countries to also consider liberalizing this within the EAC? Or are we saying EAC service, EAC traders will enjoy this within the AFCFTA regime, because once you liberalize for Africa, there's the understanding is that you have liberalized also for EAC. So, but within the any limitations that you may have put at the AFCFTA level. For Kenya, you can see real estate services is liberalized, where both leased or on fee or contract basis. We have also liberalized rental and leasing services. We have liberalized, interestingly, audiovisual services. So both radio and TV and radio and TV transmission services. We have liberalized banking and other financial services. So within banking and other financial services, you have about 30, almost 30 subsectors. So there are subsectors that were omitted under EAC but have been included at the AFCFTA. We have also liberalized transport of fuel, and we have liberalized under air transport services, selling and marketing of air transport services and computer reservation services. Again, I think there is a conversation to be had here in terms of, do we then want to also include this in the EAC schedule and perhaps improve on the commitments we have made at the EAC level, particularly with the understanding that being a deeper level of integration, because we are a common market, ideally we want to have more commitments within the EAC common market than we have within the AFCFTA free trade area. Rwanda, again, I think all of us, all countries were very keen on relating to ships. So other business services, Rwanda, you have picked relating to ship, aircraft, other transport equipment, machinery and equipment, services incidental to agriculture, hunting and forestry, and also those incidental to fishing. And interestingly, you have liberalized services auxiliary to all modes of transport, like cargo handling, storage and warehousing, and freight transport services. Tanzania, the ones you have liberalized under telecommunication, I think the key one there is private list circuit services, fax, mail, and email. As I said, for Burundi, these are obsolete, so not a big problem. You have liberalized other tourism and travel related services. I was not sure how to treat this also, because within EAC, you have liberalized other, but specified which are the other. So you have specified sports, hunting, and something else, I forget. However, here you have liberalized all other tourism and travel related services. And when you go to the CPC, other tourism and travel related services is a huge list of subsectors. So there is a lot more you have liberalized under AFCFTA. Uganda, you have liberalized maritime transport services. I remember I had a discussion here with some colleagues from Uganda just to understand what this particular liberalization meant, because my understanding, I stand to be corrected, my understanding is maritime will relate to the availability of that asset, maritime asset in your country. So you have liberalized a service that can't actually be actualized, in my mind, again, subject to discussion. But you have liberalized cargo handling, storage and warehousing, and freight transport agency services, which are critical services in transport. This was just to show you the extent to which we have added under the AFCFTA some services, some of which are very critical for EAC, to us as EAC region. So there is scope to have that discussion. Should we include these services in our own EAC commitments, and even perhaps better what we have offered at the AFCFTA level? This is something we can discuss further. So allow me to now come. Are you seeing my presentation? Hello?
Yes, please. We are seeing it very well.
No, you are seeing the PowerPoint.
Yeah.
Hello?
Yes, Agatha, we can see it clearly.
Okay. So allow me to proceed now. So that's the story I have on AFCFTA. And again, if you look at the report, there is a lot more. I think even in the report I can put, which was some of the analysis we did, we can put how many of the sectors have been committed at both the EAC and AFCFTA. So even that data we already have. I just didn't put it here, but we have it. So let's now look at advancement and progress to the EAC services agenda. This one was also a tricky one in terms of how do we score ourselves. One, because there's a lot that hasn't happened, and I think Adrian talked about it, and I'll talk a little bit about it shortly. But there's also a lot that has happened. So again, I go back to my first message that we need to inject some sense of urgency into what hasn't happened that we deem as fundamental or foundational to creating that common market. So I have given it a score of mixed trend, but leaning towards positive, so that it's the alternative was to put it as neutral, but neutral then ignores the positive trends that have been there. So we have put it as a mixed trend, but with a strong leaning to positive. So what do we see on the positive side? And I think these issues have already been discussed by Adrian, but let me very quickly go through them. We now have an EAC strategy for trading services, as well as
Ma'am, we can't see the PowerPoint.
Okay.
We can't see the PowerPoint.
That is why I was asking whether you can see it. Allow me to share again. Can you see it now?
Yes, we can. Yes, we can. Yes, we can.
Thank you. Let me just go back to the slide. So I was saying here, we have given it a mixed trend, albeit leaning towards positive, and I was explaining the why. So if we look on the positive side, there are quite some big developments. The first one, of course, being the EAC strategy for trading services and its implementation plan, which have been adopted even at council level. Perhaps even more importantly for me is that EAC has managed to mobilize resources to implement this strategy. And this has been, perhaps I say a thank you to GIZ and EU on behalf of private sector, because a lot of funding is coming from them. And again, even when you look at things like e-commerce, there is very good funding from the World Bank, which will help us address some of these challenges that we are seeing. So I think for me, that is a huge plus, because we have a direction towards which we are going in terms of trading services. The other point, and the other big win, is the expansion of the One Network area that now includes Tanzania and Burundi. So 6 partner states now are members, and we are looking forward to Burundi, to DRC and the Federal Republic of Somalia joining. One of the key points, of course, here, and I will put that also in the report, which is one of the points that has been raised, is that despite this One Network area membership, our costs are still quite high. We are still charging levies and taxes on roaming charges, which are expected to be removed. So a part of course, the call is that this framework of honor be fully implemented. But as was said, one of the major things is that it is working towards reducing this cost of cross-border telecommunication. There also has been a lot of capacity building that has been undertaken to enhance knowledge and understanding of trading services, including national trainings on trading services itself, but also national trainings on statistics. As you recall, one of our key challenges as a region is unavailability of statistics, except for Uganda, I believe, which whose Bureau of Statistics currently collects data on trading services. For all the other countries, it is something that we are starting or we will start to do. I know the training has already been started, but more importantly, it is also an activity for which there is a resource envelope. So hopefully in the next time EABC is doing this barometer, I expect they will be having much stronger trading services statistics. A lot of work has gone on also in terms of the e-commerce arena. So we have an e-commerce strategy, we have an e-commerce engagement platform, and a lot of this is also to ensure that as a region we are tapping into the digital economy, and we are not left behind, for want of a better term. This was also raised by Estella. The Republic of South Sudan has developed a schedule of commitments on trading services under the EAC. This is yet to be approved or to be submitted officially at the EAC level, but it is a process that has gone on for quite some time and has been completed. So again, this is a huge, huge win. The other positive development under the tourism sector, there is a lot that has gone on, and I'm just noting some of the areas that were raised. Things like classification criteria and assessment sheets have been developed. I believe this is actually have been revised and finalized because they used to be there. They have been revised. There's a training curriculum and also a program for the assessors of this. So those who will assess the classification, how to classify hotels. There are guidelines for undertaking national classification exercises. There's a code of conduct for assessors, again, because as you know, the classification can also become a very emotive issue. So there's a code of conduct for assessors. As a region for tourism, we have developed broad communication plan and also strategic analysis report for tourism, and have also developed a tourism catalog and a tourism barometer, a barometer indicators which serve to monitor tourism trends at EAC level and also provide up-to-date analysis on the tourism sector. I should say here, this is work that GIZ has supported and continues to support. And perhaps even the other thing I could say, for those who are in the tourism sector that are participating, some of particularly the training, particularly in terms of enhancing service skills, GIZ has an online program through Atingi that I should also add here, that I know when we were in South Sudan, they say it has been a very useful tool for them in terms of just enhancing the skills for the tourism sector. So again, some huge development just to show you why we are saying it's a mixed box. Then of course, we cannot fail to mention the expansion of EAC to include DRC and Somalia. And again, this, when you look at what this means in terms of GDP, in terms of a larger consumer market for both goods and services, I think this is a huge, huge win. So that we have noted as a positive development. And also, as you know, there have been discussions about the addition of 5 sectors that were omitted, and some of these sectors are critical. If you look at things like construction, currently construction is one of the biggest sectors across the region, contributing almost 10% of GDP in almost every country. Those were some of the sectors that had not been included. Things like recreational services, things like health services, which I think became even that much more important because of COVID and now Mpox. So there is a need to ensure that all service sectors, we have looked at their value and we have decided, we decide what we want to liberalize. So a timetable for these negotiations, I believe, has been agreed at the EAC. And I believe they will soon, if they haven't, start the processes towards negotiations for these additional 5 sectors. So that's on the positive side. On the negative side, there are only 2 issues we have noted, but they are heavy. There are 2 heavy issues. The first one, is that, again, we've been talking about this revised schedule of commitments for now more than 10 years. We still haven't made it law. And as Adrian said, for private sector, that predictability that you have made these commitments and it is set in law or is annexed to the protocol is critical when you are making investment decisions. And private sector has not been able to do this because we are still discussing this revised schedule. And again, remember, one of the key things about the revised schedule was particularly with regard to mode 4, that temporary movement of skills was a key thing in terms of the revised schedule, because in the previous, under the common market, that mode 4 is tied to workers. And yet we know that a service supplier is not really a worker. They are moving temporarily to provide a service, and we are to set the terms and conditions against which they can do this. So the urgency to conclude this discussion is major. The next issue, again, that is huge, that we see is foundational to creating that common market, is the proposed Annex 7 on the mutual recognition of academic and professional qualifications, particularly because this annex then forms the basis around which we discuss the mutual recognition agreements, which are critical, again, for service movement. So those two, because those two are foundational and they haven't been concluded and they have been under discussion for a very long time, they brought down the ranking for the regional advancement. In terms of now assessment of the restrictiveness of services trading environment, here again, we maintain the negative trend. And why are we maintaining the negative trend is because we looked through of all the barriers or the restrictions that we noted, and those restrictions had even been noted in the common market scorecard, has been noted in EAC's own framework for monitoring implementation of the common market protocol. None of those has been removed. Okay, perhaps one only has been removed in terms of transport services for Tanzania, but we had already recognized that in 2022, because it just happened as we were about to launch, so we already recognized it, so I haven't repeated it here. And because we haven't seen that new those new laws and regulations that are removing restrictions, we are still maintaining that we have a negative trend. Perhaps more importantly is that when you look at the regulatory audits that were done, all of them show that our level of restrictiveness across sectors is significantly high. Okay, let me correct myself. Is high across some sectors. Let me not say significantly high, because if you look at something like professional services, our overall level of restrictiveness is about 49 out of 100. So they show we have moderate restrictions. Moderate restrictions, but the market is on the whole open. But what does that mean? It means that even when you get into the market, then there are regulatory costs that you have to confront, whether it is getting licenses at higher fees or at longer periods, whether it is having to get into partnership with others for sectors that we have said are fully liberalized. So those are some of the restrictions that we have noted. I have a whole section, about almost 15 pages, just showing the STR, so the levels of restriction for various sectors. So again, just to show you, like for professional services, we have a score of about 49.9, which indicates a moderately open market, but with restrictions. And you can see there in the report that mode 1, particularly for professional services, is very restricted. Countries like Kenya, if we just look at engineering services, we are deemed as being completely closed, because again, there are restrictions in the law. I know I have had a discussion with the engineering sector in other discussions, and they have told us, even though we have not amended the law, we do allow engineers from other EAC countries to come and do business. But if I am an engineer sitting in Uganda or in Tanzania and I look at the law and the law is restricted, I will not know that somehow you have allowed, again, the predictability. And again, also mode 4 is very restricted, fully closed in Rwanda, partly closed in South Sudan. Again, the report gives you all these figures, and I will show you better. I mean, I can show you here if you are interested. Communication sector, we have a score of about 47.7%, indicating a moderately open market. So communications, as you know, is one of the sectors where we are on the whole mainly open. So and it's one of the sectors that is liberalized across the EAC, which then you can see the impact of that liberalization when you look at things like mobile telephony and how much that has revolutionized the region. If we look at distribution sectors, again, this is a sector that is on the whole majorly open. In fact, perhaps this is the sector which we are most open, with a score of 37.8%. Perhaps what is even interesting is that for countries that have not made commitments, say even in the retail trade like Kenya and Tanzania, the regulatory environment shows we are open. There are no restrictions. So maybe they may put restrictions in the future, but it is a sector that is relatively open. So it's a moderately open market. Then if you look at a sector like road transport, so road transport is a sector that is also moderately restricted with about 43.2%. And here, when you look particularly at mode 1, cross-border supply, and also mode 4, those are the sectors, those are the modes where we are most restricted. Air transport services is a sector where, as a region, we are also moderately open. Moderately open, but with some restrictions. But when you look particularly at the modes of supply, they tell you mode 3, which is establishment, we are relatively closed, as well as mode 4. So again, there are very interesting stories that the report tells us. If we look at, just to give you an example, if we look at air transport, because in air transport, we looked at both freight. In freight, we are less restricted than we are in air. In air transport sector, we are actually deemed a region that is moderately restricted. So in most of the others, I said moderately open, but with restrictions. This one is moderately restricted with significant barriers. Again, and this is a story I know EABC has talked over the years about the need to liberalize air transport services. And when you look at the levels of restrictions, you can see particularly mode 1, cross-border supply, all the countries are very restricted, scoring 80 over 100 in terms of restrictions. The same thing, particularly mode 1, but also the same thing with mode 3. We are above 60, and mode 4 also above 60. So the point here I am making is that when you look at our regulatory environment, it shows that none of the countries is really open in terms of meeting its commitment where EAC is concerned. So that is the barometer. I think it gives you an idea of why do we have a overall positive picture, but still saying there is a lot of work to be done. And perhaps the good thing is that we do have people who are supporting the process to address some of these barriers. So, Chair, I now want to just give very quickly the recommendations. You will note again, because I said not a lot has changed, that we have maintained quite a number of the recommendations we had made last year. Again, we can add others if there are additional recommendations to make. So the first thing, of course, is we are saying that partner states should continue to align, to undertake alignment of their domestic laws. to the CMP or revised schedule commitment, so that we can actually continue to grow our market and continue to trade without restrictions, and that services can continue to move freely within the region. So that's the first one. And I know the Stiffy, and I believe also Council has given now a new deadline of February 2028. I stand to be corrected if I have that wrong, but I think they gave 5 years, which while it is a deadline, it is also worrying that we are giving ourselves 5 years to reach the canon we would love as private sector to already reach yesterday. But again, it is a deadline. At the regional level, we are also saying we need to conclude with urgency the adoption of the revised schedule. So whatever partner states haven't done, they should do it quickly, and also conclude fast tracking of the EAC Annex 7. And following on that, then do the necessary negotiations for mutual recognition agreements as may be required. We are also saying we need to put, so one of the questions Adrian asked, and perhaps that's the question I am responding to, what can we do different? I think because we have agreed that all partner states shall remove restrictions by February 2028. I remember when I used to do the scorecard, I was challenged once by partner states. It is of no value to come every year or every 2 years and tell me, oh, you haven't done this, you haven't done this. I think part of what ought to be done is to put in place an action-oriented program to support the removal or the easing of restrictions. So beyond just telling partner states on these sectors, you have not yet met your obligations or you have not aligned your laws, have a program with each partner state to align its laws, work with them. And working with them here means also providing resources to remove these laws, because as we know, and I think we can be frank, we are within East Africa, and this is a matter that concerns us, is we are competing for resources with very other important things like health and education and what have you. We need the agenda for reform to be resourced sufficiently for work to actually happen in terms of reforming laws, because reforming laws is not just saying we need to remove this restriction. There are processes that go into them, processes of developing draft bills, processes those through the various policy bodies, public participation, and what have you, before a law actually becomes a law there. So all those processes that require cost, time, and what have you. So I think that is one of the things that should happen. I do know that a long time EAC used to do this and even give funding to partner states to implement their commitments. I don't know whether they do this still, but it is one of the things certainly that I think we need to go a step further, besides saying that these are the laws that need to be amended or we need to remove restrictions. Support that process of removing restrictions. The next thing we are saying, again, these are the cross-cutting general ones, is that we need to address the major issue of double taxation. This has been raised in very many avenues. I do know EAC is doing some work in this, but again, it is work that is that has delayed for so long. We used to have, I say used to have because it was never implemented, a double taxation agreement from 2010. Then we decided we are changing that. We now have an EAC agreement on avoidance of double taxation. And there is work that is going on in this area, but the urgency needs to be injected into it so that we can so that it can be finalized in a more timely manner. I think I had meant to remove this, agree on a timetable for negotiations. I think a timetable has been agreed, but I stand to be corrected. I thought I had removed this. I think what I have said on, yes, so ignore this one here. What I had said on the negotiations is that the EAC should develop guidelines for the negotiations, setting a threshold. Why do I say that? Is because past experience, lessons learned from our first negotiations, and even when you look at the AFCFTA, one of the lessons we can learn is that if you leave everything very open, you commit the number of sectors you want, and it's a positive list approach, meaning if you don't want to liberalize one sector, the other country doesn't want to liberalize one sector, we come out with a market that we are not really working towards a common market. And that's really what formed the decision to set the threshold of 78. And the recommendation is that even in these new 5 sectors, STIFI should set a threshold, a minimum number of subsectors that each of the partner states should commit. And of course, partner states will be at liberty to commit more. So that is one of the things that should happen. The other thing we are recommending is that private sector's capacity on data collection should be built, again, because in services, unlike goods where customs data gives you a good picture, in services data is based on reports from private sector. But those reports can only come if private sector has the necessary knowledge and understanding of what sort of data needs to be collected, how that data is collected even across modes of supply. So again, we are calling for more capacity building. And not even more, we are calling for capacity building for private sector specifically, but of course, continued capacity building for the public sector, which I believe is ongoing. On AFCFTA, we have also a general recommendation because there are very many opportunities that have arisen out of the AFCFTA. There is need to ensure the private sector is aware of these opportunities and can also leverage these opportunities. So we are calling for capacity building, for sensitization, for training, but also for the additional steps, like say, if we are talking about professional services, regulators already engaging other regulators in markets of interest to the EAC to negotiate things like MRAs. So again, these are the general recommendations. If we go to the sector specific, again, a number of recommendations have not changed because we had maintained them. We had included them last year, but they have not been implemented. Number one, we are saying complete negotiations for EAC cross-border legal practice bill and the mutual recognition agreement for legal services. It is surprising and shocking that as one of the major sectors and the drivers of law, this has not yet happened. And I know there is a lot of interest amongst the sector stakeholders for this to happen. So we are saying this is something that could be prioritized. Then we are saying review MRAs for engineering, accounting, and architectural services, because those MRAs ignored some key aspects like registration of firms and how these firms register, because they were looking more at the professional qualifications. And I think in terms of the MRAs, these are some of the other aspects they could look for. And once you review them, and I believe even that process has already started, once you remove them, we are also saying that you support countries like Burundi, Republic of South Sudan to accede to those MRAs. My understanding is that Republic of South Sudan may already have acceded to the engineering MRA that was supposed to happen in September. This September we are in. If it has happened, let me know. I will put it up as one of the key wins. If it hasn't, I know it's something that is soon coming. We are also saying enhance the regulatory framework for accounting, engineering, and architectural services. One, by supporting the establishment of an engineering and architecture sector regulator in Burundi, and for accounting services in South Sudan. This was even one of the issues that they raised, both in the strategy, but also as part of the discussions for their schedule of commitments. And we are also saying, where applicable, broaden the regulatory framework for engineering and architectural services to cover some sectors that are critical for these two sectors that in some countries are not within the ambit of the regulator. In others, they have different regulators, and the point we got is that the two don't speak. So to cover things like technologists, technicians, landscape architects, etc. So again, areas to enhance that regulatory framework. And the other thing is, in terms of accreditation, the issue of different levels of accreditation of engineering training programs has been raised. And this, I believe, is one of the things that Inter-University Council can take forward in terms of that harmonization, as well as the harmonization of registration fees and categories for engineers. It's one of the challenges that has hampered to what extent we can engineering services can move across the region. The other issue that has come out is that if we want to compete at the African level and also compete at the global level, we then have to ensure that we are meeting the standard set for engineering sector. And we singled out engineering sector because this is a sector that is growing globally. So, and there are some major, or there are some regulatory frameworks that have been agreed at the global level. There is the Dublin Accord, there is the Sydney Accord, and there is the Washington Accord. And this will help our engineers move. And let me also say, and perhaps that is also one of the additional things we should put as a recommendation. One of the things we have learned is that particularly for all other EAC partner states except Kenya, there is a huge opportunity we have not utilized through under the LDC services waiver. I say except Kenya because Kenya is not eligible to utilize that opportunity of the LDC services waiver. And one of the sectors, or one of the ways we can utilize that particularly is under mode 4, where you temporarily move, particularly for a lot of these big construction things that happen. And we were having a discussion about, like, in Qatar for the World Cup, there was half of the Asian countries, they had huge skills moving for just that particular activity. And these Asian countries have even gone ahead and negotiated even labor-related agreements and mode 4 related, specific mode 4 related agreements to help their professional skills move. And let me not even to help their professional skills move, but to help their countries tap into the LDC services waiver. In the region, I don't think this is a conversation we have ever had. I have heard Uganda talking about it once, and I think they have a strategy. I believe, I could be wrong, but as a region, given the number of countries that are LDCs that can participate in that waiver, I think there is a lot to be done, and this is one of the steps in terms of ensuring that our engineers can be recognized, automatically recognized out there, just because we are implementing some of these agreements. I do know this work may already be starting in Tanzania and in Kenya. I don't know how far it has gone, but there are discussions that have been had in the two countries. So that is for professional services. For air transport services, we have not changed the recommendations, because as far as I know, none of this has been reached. I stand to be corrected. We have called again for the implementation of the open skies policy in line with the Yamasukuru decision, as well as the single African air transport market. I think in Kenya only Rwanda I think in the EAC only Rwanda and Kenya have committed to implement the certain. I stand to be corrected if that has changed. We are also calling for the finalization of the EAC liberalization of air service regulations and the adoption of the regulations by all partner states. I don't know whether I heard they have been finalized. I stand to be guided, and if they have been finalized, have they been adopted by all partner states, then we can tweak. But I know there is also some discussions and some progress in this area, but as yet, and this is not something that has been fully finalized. We are saying harmonization of taxation regimes on air transport services, because even studies that EABC itself has done, studies that EAC has done, we see that taxation, the elements of taxation are a huge contributor to the cost of airfares. And as you know, our airfares are some of the highest in the region. Actually, not in the region, in the globe. So when you can fly, say, to Europe, cheaper than you can fly to Burundi, it tells you there is a lot that needs to be done. Then we are saying review and harmonize charging mechanisms for fees and taxes with the objective to reduce the ticket cost and to stimulate demand for air transport sector, and also promote the development of low-cost carriers by giving incentives that include terminal facilities which support their operations. Again, remember, things like air transport has a huge bearing on sectors like tourism, which are critical for the region. For road transport, I think one of the major issues has been the road user charges. And there has been a recommendation that a study should be done to propose harmonized road user charges. I am not sure whether this has been done. If it has, do let me know. But again, the point is that road user charges still remain unharmonized, and that causes a lot of challenges. Then establish a mechanism of collaboration amongst transport sector regulators. It was said, yes, there is a sectoral council for transport sector, but they don't meet to discuss the issues affecting private sector. And they don't meet as regularly as the issues arise. So there is need for these transport sector regulators to meet in a more timely manner to address some of the issues that private sector experiences with regard to transport across the region. Then harmonize insurance charges and premiums on road freight for road freight drivers, and agree on a mechanism or methodology for compensation. So again, this has been a huge issue because insurance is not portable or has not been portable. And those who are engaged or who unfortunately have accidents, how that is dealt with seems to be a major issue. Then, of course, there is the broad one of enhancing trade facilitation measures. Those of you who know the trade facilitation agreement, there are a lot of measures within that can enhance and reduce our costs of doing business and the time it takes, both the time and the cost burden, where meeting the regulatory burden, even in terms of crossing borders, dealing with delays at the ports, and even along the corridors and the airports. So when I say ports here, I mean even airports. And again, on the issue of corruption, because we hear this is a major issue where you have to pay at every roadblock. If we can remove a lot of this, and if we can automate a lot of the processes so that you reduce that human to human interaction, it would be a big win. Telecommunication services, here the major thing is on taxes and charges on roaming, as well as taxes on ICT equipment, so that we can enhance the affordability and the access. We are still, even with honor, we are still, and I said we will add that element because I got some good data. We are still relatively high in terms of the cost. And if you look at the number of people who are using internet, who have access to internet, and you compare us, say, with other African countries and even globally, we still have a lot to go. So again, those recommendations, those are new recommendations, so those recommendations stay. In education, this is a new sector we looked at. And a lot of what we put here, I think we just had one respondent on the survey who Oh yeah, I think we had just one respondent for the education services, but things like regional sector skills council, the need to establish this to bring together the public and the private sector in order to enhance the alignment of skills to the needs of the market was raised. And then also the review of various curricula, including TVET, to align them with also market needs regionally and globally was raised. And then also the needs to put in place the necessary measures, including on work permits, as well as its processing, as well as fees for charging of students from other EAC partner states, because we charge students different fees, and this has a major impact on how much of mode 2 supply for education services is able to happen. And this will, of course, allow easier mobility for both students as well as the teachers. And this is right across the whole spectrum of education, from primary right through to higher levels. Tourism services. There's a lot that can be done in tourism services, and if you look at the strategy, it has a lot more recommendations. But I think some of the ones that we can bring to fore in terms of urgency is the removal of all restrictions to free movement of tourism practitioners. Here we are talking particularly on travel agents and tour operators, as well as guides where this was liberalized within the EAC. I do know not all EAC partner states have liberalized tour guide services, but those that have, any restrictions to this should be removed. Then also there has been a discussion about bringing the EAC tourist visa under the ambit of the EAC. I think GIZ is supporting this process, but I know it's a process that has not been completed. Then there is the need for mutual recognition of tourism qualifications and a collaboration on tourism-related education and training, as well as the need to enhance or to put in place measures to support the development of low-cost airlines. Again, as I said, air transport is very critical for tourism sector. Financial sector, EAC Insurance Act, which we were told would deal with portability of insurance issues, is a major thing that has yet to be concluded, but has been in the offing for a very long time. In commercial banking, the EAC regional payment system, which we have been told as private sector is going to deal with the challenges of paying of the costs related to cross-border payment, and also issues related to the high cost of credit. I know this is a controversial one, but it is also one of the key challenges for businesses. When you see the cost of credit going even as high as 20%, and even that 20%, getting that credit, being able to access the credit without collateral is a challenge. It just shows you some of the burdens that the private sector has to deal with. And I do know it's an interesting conversation, because I have been told several times by government, tell the government to stop borrowing heavily from domestic market. That will bring down the cost. So still, I think it is both the industry and the regulators that have to work together to see how the challenge of cost and availability of affordable credit can be addressed. On distribution services, a lot of what we have here is actually based on a meeting that was held quite recently in August that brought together the distribution sector, and we were able to interview quite a number of the people who were there. And some of the key things that came out, number one is to conduct a review of the distribution sector to identify competition and consumer protection issues, and then to collect data and statistics in distribution sector, and then review or reevaluate competition laws. There was a feeling that competition laws are very heavily leaning on suppliers, and there is now the understanding, and this is the practice used globally, that power should be defined from the perspective of which of the two players, whether it's the supplier or the buyer, who has a superior bargaining position. And there is a need. If you recall, our laws were reviewed, particularly when we had issues with Uchumi and Nakumat, and they very heavily leaned on one side, which currently is not the case. So there is need to review that. And then, of course, there is a need to review, there is a need for a regional framework to address cross-border distribution sector issues in a more timely manner. With that, Chair, I beg to submit, and I thank you very much. Asanteni. Hello? Hello?
Hello, yes, thank you very much, Mr. Gatha, for the very, very good presentation. I would like to invite my colleague Patrick Moshi, who will be taking lead the question sessions. Karibu, Mr. Moshi.
Yes, thank you very much, Hidaya, and Agatha for the elaborate presentation on the barometer. So we have some few questions which people have posted, and I hope I'm audible enough, Hidaya.
Yes, Patrick, we can hear you.
Okay,
someone has to mute. Is it Emmanuel? Please mute. Thank you.
So there was a question. So Ephraim actually is, I can say it's a more or less like a contribution from Ephraim Parsi, who has stated that there's an MRA for engineers between Kenya, Uganda, and Rwanda, and he has posted it that there is an MRA for engineers between Kenya, Uganda, and Rwanda. The question here, the question posted here by
sorry, may I request you, Patrick, to raise your voice? I am struggling to hear you.
Okay, I'll raise it. Sorry about that. So Ephraim Parsi has actually given a contribution stating that there's an MRA for engineers between Kenya, Uganda, and Rwanda, and he has actually posted a link to the MRA. So maybe you'll also have to check on that, or we'll just give him some time to actually, if he's an engineer, he can give us an update. Also, there's a question by Victor Valentine. So what he has posted is that what can be the reasons behind the declining trend of services sector contribution to GDP in Tanzania from 2019 to 2023. So that's what he's inquiring. Also, the other question is that on export services, I would like to know how the partner states are doing to trade with each other in services. This is a question from Alexis from GIZ Tanzania. So maybe you can also actually share some insight on that. The other question, those are the first two questions, but also maybe Agatha can actually clarify on these questions as we give room for people to actually raise their hands and also ask their question. Agatha, back to you.
Thank you so much, Patrick, and thank you to the people that have asked the questions. On the MRA, yes, I am aware of the MRA on engineering between Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania. Actually, it is all the 5 countries are members. What we have, actually, 4 countries, sorry. Mr. Bongolo, please mute. So I am saying I am aware of the MRA, and the MRA is signed by 4 countries, Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, and Rwanda. If I can go back to my presentation, actually the presentation is requesting, that MRA, let me go back to the recommendation. The recommendation is requesting, can you see my presentation?
Yes.
So the recommendation is proposing that in addition, support these MRAs and also expand their membership to include Burundi and South Sudan. So I do recognize the MRA is there, but it has not, Burundi is not a member because they as yet don't have a regulator in place, but I believe that one is being put. If one is already in place, I can recognize that. And also Republic of South Sudan is not yet a member. But as I said, there was the expectation that they would become a member as soon as this month. So if that has happened, I will also recognize that. But yes, we are saying review the MRAs. We recognize that the MRA is there. So I hope I have clarified the point on the MRA on engineers.
Yes, you have.
Okay,
Yes, you
then
have.
to Victor, in terms of the reasons for the declining trend, I knew this question would would occur. That is why one of the things I remember raising is that let us recall that a declining trend may not always signify bad thing. It can also signify that the market is becoming much more diversified. And what we would then need to do is look at what else is growing in Tanzania that is contributing to a higher percentage than it used to, which means that the contribution of services has decreased. But remember, and that is why I have brought you back to this slide, is that reduction in the value or value contribution to GDP does not mean that services value add is not growing. It is growing, and if you look at this trend, just looking at for Tanzania, it has grown from 4.2% in 2019 to 7.3% in 2023. But you have to look at GDP from the perspective that GDP is made up of very many things, very many sectors go into the whole basket that is GDP. In Tanzania, I would imagine particularly you are a major exporter of things like coffee, tea, you are a major exporter of gold, you're a major exporter of legumes. So all those contribute to GDP, and if there has been an increase if there has been a growth in some of those sectors that has been faster than the growth in services, that would explain why the composition of GDP is changing. But I think for me, the thing you need to carry away from this conversation is that services value add to GDP on the whole has been growing, even for services in Tanzania, even though its value contribution to GDP has been reducing. I don't know whether that answers your question, Victor, but that's the key takeaway I would like you to have. Alexi, in terms of...
Sorry, this is Victor talking to you, madam.
I can't, yes.
Of course, it's a kind of confusion to me if it comes to your clarifications. How come that the GDP contribution, the service contribution to GDP in Tanzania seems to be increasing, but at the same time, if I call back to your presentation, you have indicated that from the year 2019 to 2023, the values, the percentage contribution to GDP fall from, I think, 36% to 28.9. Yes, exactly, you are presenting. Now, I get confused of your explanation. Remember, you have highlighted that we export gold, agricultural raw materials. Sometimes these goods are embedded service within them. So would you please clarify more?
Okay, let me... How else will I put this? Let me draw a theoretical picture. Let us say you are overall, and I'm saying theoretical picture because directly here I don't have the components of service, the component that makes up Tanzania's GDP, but it is something, if you are very keen, I can even extract for you later and show you. But let us say you have 5 components that are contributing to GDP. If you have, say, mining, and you have agriculture, and you have tourism, and then you have, okay, let us even leave tourism because tourism is services. You have construction, which currently we don't put in the action, even construction is, you have industry, which is manufacturing. And you are, so if your basket of GDP, or your basket, the composition of your GDP is coming from these different three things. We have manufacturing, mining, and agriculture. And your mining grows faster and expands more. Let me not even say grows faster. Expands, yes, grows faster and expands more, even by 15%. The overall value of contribution by the others, so services, agriculture, and manufacturing, will reduce relative to the overall GDP, because you have an element that is growing faster or that is expanding faster. That said, it doesn't mean that services value add is decreasing. Services is still continuing to grow. I don't know whether I am making sense, Victor.
You are, madam.
Yes. That is why I brought this other point, so that there is the understanding that it is the contribution to GDP, the bit that it contributes to overall GDP, that has decreased, but service itself has grown.
Yes, thank you very much, Agatha.
Okay.
Yes.
To Alexi, as you know, I am surprised that question came from you, because as you know, that is one of the challenges we have at the regional level, the lack of services data in terms of what we trade with each other, where services is concerned. Currently available data, whether it is from the WTO database, whether it is from the ITC, whether it is from UNCTAD, will give us trade with the world. It doesn't give us trade with each other. The only country that has trade with each other currently is Uganda, because their National Bureau of Statistics has been collecting this data. I have been told in the past that the central banks can also provide this data, but it is not currently readily and publicly available. So sadly, this is trade with the world as opposed to trade with each other. And that data is not available, but I stand to be corrected. If it is available, I am happy to do a quick analysis. I submit Patrick and Alexi.
Oh, thank you very much, Agatha, for the clarification. Now I see there was a hand from Ephraim. Ephraim, maybe if you can share your contribution just in 1 minute.
Thanks.
Ephraim?
No, yes, I was just informing Agatha that South Sudan is going to sign the MRA next week here in Arusha. My name is Ephraim. I'm working on MRAs for GIZ EAC. So yeah, this is something I'm following closely.
That is lovely news. I think I shall, Adrian, delay your report and note that as a big win. And congratulations to the Republic of South Sudan and to the engineering sector.
And also to the consultant who supported them to develop the commitment.
I know. Thank you. Other questions?
Yes.
Estella? Oh, sorry, Patrick, I'm taking away your flow. Sorry.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Agatha, for the very good summary of the barometer. I also just wanted to supplement what Ephraim has submitted with regard to development under the MRA, and maybe use this forum to also inform you or update you on some of the work that we are envisaging to conduct through Lifted. So network is terrible.
No, we can hear you, Estella. Estella? Sorry, is Estella speaking? I can't hear her.
No, she's not speaking, but she's online.
Okay.
Estella, you have the floor.
Network is a big problem. Yeah, so I was just going to supplement on what's planned under the under lifted with regard to MRAs. So we are going to conduct a comparative assessment on the regulation and classification of ICT professionals. You had a recommendation to that effect, that we need to look at how professionals are classified. So this is planned, will kick off, I believe, early next year. But with regard to reviewing of the MRAs, it has come to light that while the legal framework for MRAs is still being finalized, i.e. Annex 7, there are actually no tools to operationalize them. So, for example, with the accession of South Sudan, it emerged that there was no formal process for a new member to accede to an existing MRA. Those are the kinds of tools I'm talking about. Once Annex 7 is approved, what are the next steps? What are the guidelines for partner states to do the ratification? What about the process for review, and so on and so forth? So in order to close this gap, we will also be supporting the preparation of some of these critical toolkits. Yeah. So maybe the review should come later. So if we finalize a toolkit, say by the middle of next year, and then we have some consensus building with other professional services that have MRAs, have them adopted across the board, we can then start looking at review for the existing MRAs, maybe from July next year onwards.
Okay.
So yeah, so in the MRA space, things are moving, hopefully.
Okay, thank you. I will capture, particularly because the MRA for engineering for South Sudan South Sudan will accede to it next week. I will capture that in some of the developments and also some of the issues you have raised, Estella.
Okay, thank you very much, Agatha, and thank you very much, Estella, for the contribution. Now we have come to nearly the end of to the closing session of our barometer. Now, maybe I would like to invite again Estella to actually give us a few closing remarks and actually state that our barometer, to officiate our barometer that is officially launched. Welcome, Madam Estella.
Thank you, Patrick. Thank you, EABC and Agatha. Thanks, EABC, for organizing this session and conducting the Trading Services Barometer, and to Agatha for very ably presenting what can be complicated, complex piece of work, but I believe you have broken it down in a manner that all of us who have participated today have been able to understand where we are, and also to get insights in the areas where further work is required, and where efforts for policy advocacy should focus. So thank you very much. I would like to request EABC to give us some indication on what the next steps are. If possible, I would request that we perhaps have another week or so where we can consolidate comments from other stakeholders that may not have been able to give their comments today due to the time limitations before we can have a final trading services barometer. If this has been done, and if it's if you believe there is no requirement for additional comments, then I would be happy to close the validation. Otherwise, I would request that we extend it a little bit, maybe for a week, have the updates that have been provided today, but also give some more time for some private sector stakeholders that may still have some comments and feedback to the barometer.
Yes, thank you very much, Estela. Yes, as EABC, yes, will be our consultant, Agatha, and expert on trading service will actually be updating the report with the comments that and the insight that has been shared here today. And also we'll engage also further widely to actually incorporate more comments from other stakeholders, especially on the areas which were highlighted from these discussions. And thank you very much for attending. We appreciate GIZ's support to EABC work and partnership. And with those few remarks, maybe now we've come to an end of our webinar, and we look forward to meeting you again. And thank you very much for your contribution, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thank you. Bye. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Yeah.